It's the Real News Network. I'm Greg Wilpert in Baltimore. War is escalating in Idlib province of northwestern Syria. Recent reports say that over 700,000 people were displaced from their homes due to conflict between Syrian and Turkish forces, which has garnered some attention in global media outlets. Both the Syrian government, headed by President Bashar al-Assad, and Turkey, headed by President Recep Erdogan, are allied with Russia. Now that they are directly fighting each other, though, it seems that the contradictions in Russia's Syria policy have strained to their breaking point. Meanwhile, in Turkey, President Erdogan is fanning the flames of war.
By the end of February, we are determined to push the regime forces to the lines of the Sochi Agreement, to beyond our observation posts. We will do this by any means necessary, by air or ground, without hesitating, without stalling. If there is the smallest injury to our soldiers on the observation posts or other places, I am declaring from here that we will hit the regime forces wherever from today, regardless of the lines of the Sochi Agreement or Idlib.
Joining me now to analyze the latest developments in the war between Syria and Turkey is Barış Karac. He is a lecturer in international development studies at Trent University in Ontario, Canada, and he is also the editor of the book Accumulations, Crises, and Struggles, Capital and Labor in Contemporary Capitalism. Thanks for joining us again, Barış.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
So the rebel forces have held Idlib actually since the beginning of the Syrian civil war, but recently Syrian forces killed at least 5 Turkish soldiers in Idlib. Now, how did it happen that outright fighting between the Turkish and the Syrian military in Idlib became possible, and that it has received barely any media attention so far?
First of all, I would like to say a couple of things about the so-called rebel forces. Yes, the rebel forces are in control of most of the Idlib province, including the town of Idlib. But I think it's important to tell our viewers who these rebel forces are. The most powerful organization on the ground in Idlib is called Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham, which is a coalition actually of a number of jihadist organizations. But the most powerful, the most prominent one within that coalition is Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda in Syria. So I think it is important to keep that in mind when we're talking about these rebel forces that are operating in Idlib. Secondly, Idlib province was supposed to be one of the 4 demilitarized originally zones in Syria. And in 2018, there was the Sochi Accord, according to which a zone would become demilitarized between the rebel forces and the Syrian military, and there would be a ceasefire. However, last year, the Syrian government, with the support of Russia, started to start an operation in Idlib. And now, every day, increasingly it controls a larger part of this province. That includes the 12 observation posts set up by Turkish military in the province. So some of now these observation posts are in those spaces, in that territory, that is controlled by a Syrian army with the backing of Russians. And last week, 8 Turks were killed by the Syrian forces. 7 of them were military people and 1 civilian. This took place during the arrival of the reinforcements from Turkey to support the already existing Turkish military presence in the Idlib province. Now, every day we hear these threats, especially coming from Tayyip Erdogan, directed at the Syrian government, but also extending to Russian forces on the ground. But what is more concerning is his threats towards the Syrian forces, of course, because I don't see it as a likely development, the confrontation between Turkish military and Russians in Syria.
Now, President Assad has made no secret that he plans to retake all of the rebel-controlled territory in Syria, and that his focus on Idlib is a direct result, actually, of being blocked along the banks of the Euphrates River by Russian forces. And as you said, it's unlikely that they're going to confront them. So the question remains, what is Erdogan trying to achieve in Idlib? And is it worth sacrificing his alliance with Russia?
Well, first of all, I think this indicates a bankruptcy of Turkish foreign policy regarding Syria. Before the uprisings began in the Arab world and then spread into Syria, Assad and Tayyip Erdogan used to be buddies. They even organized vacations, so on and so forth. And then when the uprising began in Syria, Tayyip Erdogan bet on the opposition. And his goal was to extend his as well as Turkish influence over the greater part of the Middle East, especially over the Sunni territories. But this has completely gone bankrupt. And what has been happening in Idlib and other parts of Syria in recent years show this very clearly. But when it comes to domestic politics, Idlib has played and will, I think, continue to play an important role. Because in Turkey, Tayyip Erdogan's party, the AKP, has been in power for a long time. Recently, it has been in need of the support of the ultra-nationalists, or if you will, the neo-fascist MHP, in order to stay in power and implement a number of policies without the interference of the opposition. So what has been happening in Idlib, especially with the Turkish military people getting killed, has important consequences within Turkey in terms of mobilizing the nationalist vote and consolidating the nationalist electorate behind Erdogan. Turkey has been going through a very severe, actually, economic crisis. There have been a number of failures when it comes to foreign policy, and soon the policy regarding Libya will be one of a failure. I'm almost certain about it. But when it comes to within the borders of Turkey, Idlib has and will play an important role for Erdogan to consolidate his power base, which has weakened in the past couple of years.
I want to turn to the role of the United States in all of this. Do you think it's fair to say that the sudden withdrawal of U.S. troops from the region has actually contributed to this escalation? And if so, what interests did the U.S. withdrawal serve? Or is it perhaps in the interest of the U.S. to keep the war in Syria going and to tie up Syria's allies, that is Russia and Iran, in Syria?
Well, of course, the withdrawal of U.S. troops in 2019 contributed significantly to this outcome. Now, the most powerful power broker in the country is definitely Russia. So Russia calls the shots to a great extent, and I think it will call the shots in the near future as well. Turkey cannot take action against Russia. Turkey is dependent on this country for natural gas, and then recently, Turkstream became effective, operating. And Turkey has bought S-400 air defense system from Russia instead of the Patriot from the United States. And also there's a trade volume of between 20 and $25 billion between the two countries. So Turkey will not dare confront Russia on the ground, despite all these threats and machismo coming from Tayyip Erdogan. And now, what is interesting is that there was a meeting between Turkish and U.S. officials yesterday, and Turkey is seeking the assistance of the United States in Syria. But at this point, I don't see anything coming out of this that will change the outcome or the ongoing outcome of the ongoing process in the northern part of the country.
Okay. Well, we're going to continue to follow this situation, but we'll leave it there for now. I was speaking to Baris Karash, lecturer in International Development Studies at Trent University. Thanks again, Baris, for having joined us today.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network.